12 years ago I came home from school and put my key in the lock. It didn't turn. I tried again, thinking it was just stuck, but the cylinder was dead. That was when I saw the note taped to the wood at eye level. It was in my father's handwriting, sharp, angular. It read, "We know what you stole. Do not knock. You are dead to us." Next to my feet were 2 black garbage bags containing my clothes. I didn't scream. I didn't pound on the door. I just picked up the bags and walked away. Drop a comment below and tell me what is the one unforgivable thing a family member has done to you. I read every single story. 12 years later, my life was no longer defined by what was missing, but by what I had built with my own hands. My antique restoration workshop sat at the end of a gravel road high in the mountains, where the air tasted of pine resin and cold stone. It was a sanctuary of dust and gold. The silence here was not empty. It was heavy, filled with the scent of linseed oil, beeswax, and old mahogany. I preferred the company of broken things. Wood did not lie, wood did not accuse. If a chair leg was fractured, it didn't blame you for its weakness. It simply waited for the glue and the clamp. The morning the letter arrived, the sun was cutting through the high windows, illuminating the dust mows, dancing in the air like suspended memories. I saw the envelope sitting on my workbench where the courier had left it. It was cream-coloured, heavy stock, expensive. My mother's handwriting. Looped across the front, the same elegant, performative script she used for thank-you notes after dinner parties. Susan. I didn't call her Mom anymore, not even in the quiet of my own mind. She was just Susan, a woman I used to know. I wiped my hands on my apron, removing the traces of varnish, and picked it up. It felt light, insignificant. I didn't hesitate. I didn't take a deep breath to study my nerves. I simply slid my thumb under the flap and tore it open. The letter inside was exactly what I expected. 2 pages of dense text detailing how much they missed me, how 12 years was a long time to hold a grudge, how they were getting older and wanted to put the past behind us. There was no apology, no admission of the $8,000 worth of jewelry they accused me of stealing, just a vague, suffocating blanket of requests for reconciliation. I read it once, scanning the lines with the detached precision of an actuary reviewing a ledger. They wanted a bridge. They wanted access. They wanted the daughter they had thrown away to come back and complete their family portrait. I looked at the words, but they didn't land. They didn't hurt. It was like reading a script for a play I was no longer cast in. My heart rate didn't spike. My hands didn't shake. The anger that used to burn me alive in my 20s had cooled into something harder, more useful. It was no longer a fire. It was a diamond, cold, clear, and unbreakable. I walked over to the cast iron wood stove that heated the shop. I opened the heavy metal door, feeling the rush of heat against my face. The fire was low, hungry for fuel. I didn't crumple the letter. I didn't tear it into pieces in a fit of rage. I simply held it out and fed it into the flames. I watched the cream paper curl, the elegant handwriting, turning black, then grey, then nothing. It took less than 10 seconds for their 12 years of silence to turn into ash. I closed the stove door with a metallic clang that echoed through the shop. I didn't feel relief, and I didn't feel sadness. I felt efficient. The letter had served a purpose. It had raised the temperature of my workspace by a fraction of a degree. That was the only warmth my parents were capable of giving me now. I turned back to my workbench, picked up my chisel, and went back to work. The chair wasn't going to fix itself. To understand why I burned that letter, you have to understand the architecture of the house I grew up in. It was a beautiful house, a colonial on the coast, filled with things that looked valuable but couldn't be touched. My sister K.H. Lowe was the centerpiece. She was adopted when I was 5, a porcelain doll with blonde curls and a fragile constitution that demanded constant, breathless attention. From the moment she arrived, the roles were cast in stone. Chloe was the golden child, the protagonist, the star. I was the stage hand. I was the utility child. My job was to be invisible, reliable, and to absorb any darkness that might stain the family portrait. I didn't hate Chloe back then. I mostly felt sorry for her. It must be exhausting to be perfect all the time. But as we got older, I realized that perfection was a weapon. If a vase broke, it was my clumsiness, even if I was in another room. If Chloe failed a test, it was because I hadn't helped her study enough. I became the designated vessel for their disappointments. It wasn't just unfair, it was systemic. Then came the summer I turned 18. My parents had a wall safe behind a painting in the study, a cliché that fit their pretentious lives perfectly. Inside, they kept emergency cash and my grandmother's heirloom jewelry collection. $80,000 in total value. One afternoon, my father opened the safe to retrieve a necklace for a gala and found it empty. No cash, no diamonds, just a dark metal hollow. There was no investigation. There were no police called to dust for fingerprints. There was only K.H. Lowe weeping softly on the velvet sofa, confessing that she had found drugs in my room. She told them I had a secret addiction, that I had been stealing from them for months to feed a habit I didn't have. It was a lie so absurd it should have collapsed under its own weight. I was a straight-A student who spent my Friday nights restoring old furniture in the garage. I didn't even drink coffee. But they didn't look at my grades, they didn't ask for a drug test. They looked at K.H. Lowe's tears and then they looked at me with a terrifying sense of relief. That is the trap of normalized cruelty. They didn't believe the lie because it was credible. In the economy of our family, K.H. Lowe's innocence was the most expensive asset they owned. To protect it, someone had to pay. If K.H. Lowe wasn't the thief, then the golden child was flawed and their parenting was a failure. But if I was the villain, if I was the drug-addicted thief who betrayed them, then the narrative remained intact. Chloe was the victim, and they were the noble, suffering parents dealing with a bad seed. I wasn't exiled because of evidence. I was exiled because they needed a scapegoat to keep their mythology alive. The sentencing was swift. My father didn't yell. He simply told me that to protect the family reputation they wouldn't press charges, but I was no longer their daughter. He watched me pack 2 bags, he watched me walk out the front door. And then he changed the locks. I didn't look back. I realized then that I wasn't leaving a home. I was escaping a crime scene where I was the only casualty. They kept their reputation. They kept their golden child. And I kept my sanity, which was the only thing of value I took with me. The silence of the mountains is a physical weight. You get used to it. You learn to distinguish the sound of a hawk's wing from the snap of a dry twig. So when the sound of an engine cut through the thin mountain air, it felt like a violation. It wasn't the rattle of a delivery truck. It was the low, purring hum of a luxury engine. I looked out the window. A black sedan was crawling up my gravel driveway, looking like a beetle navigating a rock slide. It was a car that belonged in a country club parking lot, not here where the roads were more mud than asphalt. I didn't need to see the license plate. I knew who it was. Richard and Susan. They had found me. I didn't lock the door. I didn't hide. I walked back to my workbench, picked up a block of sandpaper and returned to the oak table leg I was refinishing. I set the rhythm, scrape, pause. When the door opened, letting in a draft of cold air and the cloying scent of expensive perfume, I didn't look up. Alexis, it was Susan's voice. Older, thinner, it wavered, trying to find a footing in a room that offered no handholds. I kept sanding. My God, look at this place, Richard muttered. They walked into my peripheral vision. They looked like tourists in a foreign land, uncomfortable in their cashmere coats and polished Italian leather shoes that were already coating with fine sawdust. They stood awkwardly near the entrance, waiting for the script to start. They were waiting for me to scream, to cry, to demand answers. They were waiting for the scene where the prodigal daughter demands an apology so they can withhold it and maintain their power. I gave them nothing. We brought you something, Susan said, stepping forward. She placed a cardboard box on the corner of my workbench, just some things from your old room. We thought it was time to put all that ugliness behind us. It was just a terrible misunderstanding, Lexi. We were all so emotional back then. A misunderstanding. That was what they called exiling their teenage daughter with $20 in her pocket. I stopped sanding for a heartbeat. The silence in the room stretched tight as a piano wire. I looked at the box. I could see the edge of a stuffed bear I had slept with when I was 6. A bribe. They were trying to buy my compliance with the ghosts of my own childhood. We want you to come home, Richard said, trying to summon his old authority but failing. We're willing to forgive the past if you are. I looked at him then. Really looked at him. He was shrinking. The man who had seemed like a giant when I was 18 was now just a man in a suit that fit him a little too loosely. He was waiting for me to engage. He needed me to engage. This is the invisible chain of the survivor. For years, I thought fighting back meant screaming the truth until they heard it. But I realize now that arguing with people committed to misunderstanding you is not an act of strength. It is an act of submission. It requires you to step into their reality, to validate their premise that there is a debate to be had. There was no debate. There was only the truth, and they had forfeited their right to hear it from me. Silence was not a retreat, it was sovereignty. By refusing to speak, I was refusing to give them the fuel they needed to burn me. I looked back down at the table leg. I applied the sandpaper. Scrape, pause, scrape. Alexa, say something. Susan pleaded, her voice rising in pitch. Don't be like this. I blew the dust off the wood. The cloud drifted toward them, settling on their dark coats. I picked up a rag and began to apply the stain. They stood there for another minute, paralyzed by my refusal to play my part. They didn't know what to do with a victim who wouldn't bleed. Finally, Richard scoffed a short, sharp sound of dismissal. Fine, if you want to rot in this shack, that's your choice. They turned and walked out. The heavy door clicked shut. I listened to the engine start, the tires crunching on the gravel, the sound fading down the mountain until the silence returned. Only then did I stop working. My hands were steady. I picked up the cardboard box they had left, walked to the trash bin and dropped it inside. I didn't open it. I didn't need their memories. I was busy making my own. 2 days later, the silence was broken again. Not by a luxury sedan but by the rattle of a pickup truck. I knew as well as my own heartbeat. It was Justin. He was my neighbor, my ex-boyfriend from a lifetime ago, and the only person from that town who had refused to believe the lie. He was the one who had driven me to the bus station 12 years ago, handing me $450 he had saved in a coffee tin so I wouldn't starve. He didn't park near the house. He drove straight up to the open bay doors of the workshop, killed the engine and stepped out. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He walked toward me with a manila envelope gripped in his hand like a weapon. Justin was usually calm, a man who moved with the slow, deliberate pace of someone who worked with stone. But today he vibrated with a dark, kinetic energy. "They came here, didn't they?" he asked. It wasn't a question. I nodded, wiping my hands on a rag. 2 days ago they brought a teddy bear. Justin let out a harsh, incredulous sound that wasn't quite a laugh. He tossed the envelope onto my workbench. It slid across the smooth oak and stopped inches from my hand. "You need to read this." He said Lo was arrested this morning in the city. Insurance, fraud, blackmail. Apparently she's been running a scheme on her wealthy friends for years, threatening to expose their secrets if they didn't pay up. She messed with the wrong people, Lexi. She's in a holding cell right now. I looked at the envelope, Chloe in jail. It felt inevitable, like gravity. But Justin wouldn't drive up the mountain just to tell me my sister was a criminal. We already knew that. "Open it," he said. His voice was low, dangerous. I opened the clasp and pulled out a stack of photocopied police reports. My eyes scanned the dense, bureaucratic text until they landed on a paragraph highlighted in yellow. During the raid on K.H. Lowe's apartment, the police had seized assets to cover her debts. In a wall safe, they found a velvet pouch containing antique diamond earrings, a pearl necklace, and a platinum brooch. My grandmother's jewelry, the $80,000 worth of evidence that had convicted me without a trial. "They found it," I whispered. "It was with her the whole time." "Keep reading," Justin said. I turned the page. It was a transcript of Chloe's interrogation. She was trying to cut a deal, trying to trade information for leniency. The detective had asked her if her parents were involved in the theft. K.H. Lowe's answer was on the record, transcribed in black and white. No, they weren't involved in the theft, she had said, but they knew. Mom found the necklace 3 years ago. It was sewn into the lining of my winter coat when I was moving condos. She found it and she showed Dad. I stopped breathing. The air in the workshop seemed to vanish. They asked me why I had it. The transcript continued. I told them I took it by accident, that I was scared. They believed me. Dad said if they returned it now or told anyone, it would ruin my engagement and drag up the whole mess with Alexis again. He said it was better to let sleeping dogs lie. So he gave it back to me. He told me to hide it better this time. I dropped the paper. It fluttered to the floor, landing in the sawdust. 3 years ago they knew. They had held the proof of my innocence in their hands. They had looked at the cold, hard reality that they had destroyed their own daughter for nothing, and they had chosen to bury it again. They didn't rehide the jewelry to protect the family. They rehid it to protect their egos. It meant admitting that their golden child was a thief and a liar, so they chose to let me stay dead to them. The visit 2 days ago, the teddy bear, the plea to come home, it wasn't because they missed me. It was because they knew K.H. Lowe's house of cards was falling and they needed to secure my silence before the police report went public. They weren't here to apologize. They were here to buy an alibi. I looked up at Justin. My vision was clear, sharp, terrifyingly focused. "They knew," I said. My voice didn't shake. "For 3 years they knew. They're coming back," Justin warned. "Richard's car passed me on the lower road. They're heading up here right now. They know the news is out." I picked up the chisel I had been using. The steel was cold and heavy in my palm. "Good," I said. "Let them come." 30 minutes later the black sedan returned. This time it didn't crawl. It skidded to a halt, gravel spraying against the workshop siding. Richard and Susan burst through the door and the mask of composure they had worn 2 days ago was gone. Richard's tie was undone. Susan's face was blotchy, her eyes wide with a panic that only people who have lived their entire lives for appearances can feel when the curtain falls. They didn't waste time with pleasantries. They didn't offer teddy bears. "You know," Richard said, his voice ragged. "Justin told us he was coming here. You know about the arrest." I leaned against my workbench, crossing my arms. "I know you found the necklace 3 years ago. I know you sewed it back into the lining of a coat to save your reputation while I was scraping by on instant noodles." Susan let out a sob, a wet, ugly sound. We were trying to protect the family, Alexis K.H. Lowe. She's fragile, she couldn't handle prison. We thought if we just gave it time, we could fix it without destroying everything. And now I asked, why are you here now, to confess, to repent? We need you, Richard said, and the desperation in his voice was pathetic. The press is all over this. The police are asking questions about the original theft. If you come forward, if you issue a statement saying, we reconciled years ago, that we handled this privately as a family, we can survive this, we can say the police report is exaggerated. But if you confirm you were exiled, if you confirm we knew, we lose the business, we lose the house. There it was, the transaction. They weren't here for my forgiveness. They were here for my endorsement. They wanted to use my name, the one they had dirtied, to scrub their own clean. I reached into my apron pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I had written it out while waiting for them. I smoothed it onto the workbench. This is an invoice, I said calmly. Richard blinked, confused. What, you want money? We can give you money. How much? 50, 100. It's not for money, I said. It's an itemized list of what you stole. 12 years of a father, 12 years of a mother, a college education, my reputation in our hometown, the ability to trust anyone who says they love me, $80,000 worth of innocence. I pushed the paper toward them. The total is listed at the bottom. They looked down. At the bottom, in my sharp, clear handwriting, I had written insufficient funds. You can't afford me, I said. You don't have the currency, you are logically, morally, and emotionally bankrupt. I'm your father, Richard shouted, his face turning a dangerous shade of red. You owe us your life. I owe you nothing, I replied. This is karmic justice, Richard, but it's not the kind where I scream at you. It's the kind where I remove myself from the equation entirely. I walked to the door and held it open. The cold mountain wind rushed in, smelling of snow and pine. You are trespassing in my workshop, I said. I have customers coming tomorrow. And I need to clean up the mess you've made. You hate us that much, Susan whispered, clutching her pearls as if they could choke her. I don't hate you, I said, and realized for the first time that it was true. Hate requires energy. Hate requires attachment. I don't hate you, Susan. I'm indifferent to you. To me, you're just strangers who wandered into the wrong house and now you need to leave. The power of removal is absolute. If I had screamed, they would have felt important. If I had cried, they would have felt powerful, but my indifference terrified them. It erased them. They looked at me, really looked at me, and saw a wall of ice that no amount of pleading could melt. They walked out. They didn't look back. They looked like ghosts fading into the daylight. I watched them get into their car, two small figures in a landscape too big for them, and drive away. They were going back to a world of lawyers, scandals, and ruin. I was staying here. I watched the black sedan disappear down the mountain road. A dark blemish finally scrubbed from the landscape. The dust cloud it kicked up hung in the air for a moment, then settled back into the earth. It was over. They were gone, and this time they weren't coming back. I turned to Justin. He was leaning against his truck, arms crossed, watching me with a look of quiet respect. You okay? He asked. I'm better than okay, I said. I'm done. He nodded, pushed off the truck, and climbed into the driver's seat. I'll let you get back to work. If you need anything, you know where I am. I know, I said. Thank you, Justin, for everything. He drove away, his tail lights fading into the trees. I was alone again, but for the first time in 12 years, the solitude didn't feel like an exile. It felt like ownership. I walked back into the workshop. The air was still cold from the open door, but the smell of pine and varnish was returning, chasing away the lingering scent of my mother's perfume. I went to the heavy wooden door and threw the deadbolt click. It was a solid mechanical sound, a sound of finality. I wasn't locking them out because I was afraid they would hurt me. I was locking them out because they didn't belong here. This was a place for things that could be fixed, and they were beyond repair. I returned to my workbench. The oak chair leg was still clamped in place, the fracture line waiting for attention. I picked up my tools. I didn't just glue the wood back together. I reached for a small jar of gold powder and mixed it with the epoxy. It's an old technique, a philosophy that says you shouldn't hide the damage, you should highlight it. You should fill the cracks with gold because the break is part of the history and the repair makes the object more valuable than it was before. I applied the gold mixture to the cracks, smoothing it out with a steady hand. I watched the vein of gold dry, turning a jagged scar into a seam of light. They had tried to erase me. They had tried to sand me down until there was nothing left, but they had failed. I had taken the scraps they threw away, the silence, the isolation, the hunger, and I had built a life out of them. I wasn't the girl who was erased anymore. I was the woman who had written herself back into existence using her own ink on her own paper. Outside, the sun began to set behind the ridge. The light shifted, flooding the workshop with a deep amber glow. It caught the dust moes, turning them into suspended sparks. It caught the gold vein in the chair leg, making it shine. The silence of the mountain settled around me, heavy and sweet. It was no longer the silence of a victim waiting for a rescue that would never come. It was the silence of a queen in her castle, surrounded by the treasures she had made with her own hands. I put down my tools. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the smell of wood and peace. I was whole. If you've ever had to build yourself back up from zero, share this story. Let's remind the world that we are not defined by the people who couldn't love us. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget subscribe to the channel and share this story. You're not alone.